Well, we need to talk. This is not the video I set out to do, but this is the video that we're gonna get. Originally, this was going to be a video about what Hellenic polytheists or people who have run around recon circles for a little while might know as the lunar month cycle. It has a few different names. It doesn't have an official name for a reason I won't get into. But most people recognize it as Hecate's Deipnon, Noumenia, and Agathos-Daimon. All three cycles and rituals and festivals sort of fall right around the new moon. And even most non-Hellenic polytheists know Hecate's Deipnon, Hecate's supper. It's a very common thing amongst people who worship Hekate. And now here's the rub. So I set out, as I usually do with these videos, with research. As you can probably tell from the title of this video, that did not go well. And for those of you who don't know, the idea of Hecate's Deipnon is that it takes place on the dark moon. What is scientifically like the new moon is actually when you first see the sliver in the sky, and the dark moon is supposed to be when there's nothing in the sky. And this idea was that you would go outside and make libations to Hekate. You don't turn around because you don't want to invite spirits into your home, and you leave her offerings, and you clean out things, and you do a lot of purifications. A lot of it's very scapegoat ritual. I wish I talked about my purification and cleanliness video. That's the gist. And then Noumenia is the following day, where you honor Selene, or Selene, the goddess of the moon, the personification of the moon, because that's when you see the first sliver and you read a hymn to her and make offerings to her. And then the following day is the Agathos-Daimon, where you dedicate things to the Agathos-Daimon. May or may not be Zeus. I will probably make a whole video on the Agathos-Daimon because he's weird. And that was kind of sort of the whole thing. It was like people would often write like Deipnon-Noumenia, Agathos-Daimon. I've written them out in hyphens before. And let me tell you folks, the grand total sources I found for the Deipnon, you can count it on one hand. That's right, it's one source. And that is a quote from Aristophanes' Plutus. And I'm going to read this quote to you now, and I'm going to talk about my issues with it. I know, before people come at me, I know it's mentioned in Plutarch's Moralia, as well as Athenaeus. However, those sources are several hundred, I cannot stress this enough, several hundred years after the classical age. Like, I don't want to discount early historians because I quote them too. However, it's the fact that we don't have evidence for it anywhere else. And even then, when you look at those sources, it's kind of like they don't really say a whole lot. But I'm going to read this quote from Aristophanes' Plutus. Ask Hekate whether it is better to be rich or starving, and she will tell you that the rich send her a meal every month, and the poor man makes it disappear before it is even served. Aristophanes, Plutus, line 410. So there he does mention a meal to Hekate, and the word for meal is Deipnon or Deipna. However, nowhere does it say exactly when this date is, or anything else on this, nor does it say if it is commonplace, or if it is something that is done randomly, like maybe it is considered pious to give Hekate a meal once a month. So that is the only contemporaneous to the classical period source that I have found. And this is kind of why I kind of want to touch on the problem of sources in general in Hellenic polytheist circles. Now, most of us are not classicists. I mean, I have met someone who is getting their degree in classics who is also a Hellenic polytheist. However, the vast majority of us are what one would call an independent historian. Now, being an independent historian can be fraught with trapping, shall we say. One of the things that we have to consider when looking at sources is the context of the source. So if I were to look at that quote from Aristophanes, believing that the Deipnon is a thing that was done historically, I would look at that source and I would say, oh yeah, this is proving my point. However, suspend your disbelief, pretend you don't even know what it is, and you read that quote. It doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you when. All it tells you is that the rich give Hekate an offering and that the poor will eat it. That's it. We also have to keep in mind that this is a comedy. Aristophanes is a comic writer. Comedies were known for exaggerating things and not really depicting things how they always were. And there has been debate about this quote. Is he saying that that Hekate is charitable? Or is it saying that the poor are so desperate that they are taking meals from Hekate? We don't know. We don't know what Aristophanes was trying to say. We don't have that knowledge. So when I sat down and to write this, I really just was like, oh, this is another Carinip situation. So for those of you who didn't see my video about cleanliness and purification, where I sort of went down on a rabbit hole about Carinips, I'm going to get into what I call the Great Carinip Debate. They had the same exact problem as I'm finding with Deipnon, where there is a whisper down the alley that happens. Recon sites and recon blogs, and at the surface, these blogs are very well sourced because they provide you with sources. However, providing someone with sources is not enough to prove your point. You can provide a lot of sources and say a bunch of nonsense. It's kind of how we got here in the first place. And when you're using sources from not the classical period to try to talk about the classical period, there is an expected way that you're supposed to do it. And now, I admit, like, I put sources on my videos. I don't usually put page number or anything like that, partly because, like, I ain't got time for that. I don't want anyone to think that this is some sort of scholarly blog or that I am a classicist, because I'm not. I work in the historical field, but I'm an independent historian by all accounts. This is a fun channel. This is not necessarily I'm writing my doctoral thesis on every single video, because that would be bananas. Now let's talk about the other quote from Athenaeus. So, Apollodorus. I don't know if they're talking about real Apollodorus or pseudo-Apollodorus, because they're two different things. Why are classics like this? And this little section is brought to you by John D. Mikalson, a wonderful historian. He's the one where we get the Attic calendar from, and that was kind of his whole deal, working on the Attic calendar specifically, comparing a little bit to different polis. Here is what he says. Day 30, Apollodorus, as quoted in Athenaeus, states that Deipna were given to Hekate on the 30th day of each month. There is no indication that these private offerings in the evening entailed a monthly festival day. That wasn't damning enough. He goes on to say, in every single month, on the last day of the month, this is what he has to say, no indisputable evidence as to the nature of this day survives. The other one wasn't strong enough. That's pretty resolute on the nature of the Deipnon, or as some people have called it, Hekate. Now, I've also never seen that anywhere, although I will admit I don't know ancient Greek. I think that is pulled from some ancient Greek sources when discussing the end of the month. If anyone has any sources on the term Hekate, oh god, I'm the worst at this. I'm just spelling on screen. If anyone has any sources on where that term comes from, please post it in the comments. Please. We do have evidence for Noumenia being a thing. However, it doesn't look at all anything like how modern recons have described it in various sites, that if you Google Noumenia or Hekate, it will show up. But it's not how it's actually attested. I always thought Noumenia was supposed to be a day of cleaning and a day of offering to Selene. I don't know where that came from. That is not true. John D. Mikalson goes on to say in another article entirely that the Noumenia was a thing. It was a time for relaxation, actually, and that the day before Noumenia you were supposed to pay your debts, and that's when the cleaning occurred. And then on Noumenia it was like a day. This is the time, if you have not made any offerings, this is sort of like a state-sanctioned time for you to make your offering and be pious. And he says that there is no specific deity that was offered to you that day. It was whatever deity that you were closest to, or whatever deity you wanted to offer to, or you can make an offering to all the gods if you wanted to. There's also evidence to suggest that the Agathos-daemon, the household's protector spirit, was the one who was offered to on that day. So unfortunately, when it comes to the Deipnon, I really can't find any evidence for it, other than that mention in Plutus by Aristophanes. Hello, it is Editing Blythe here to interject with some new information. Well, new old information. It's not really new information if it's several hundred years old. Anyway, so over the past 48 hours, I have been diving into every source I can find, asking around in my circles, and I'm able to interject with more information. So I mentioned in my little segment right before this about Moralia and how I couldn't find mention of Hekate anywhere. That's because there are multiple versions of Moralia. Quelle surprise. So the one that they are referencing is specifically the Loeb Classics Library, which comes from Harvard. And there was like a fragment that they decided to include in this translation of Moralia that is not in every translation of Moralia, which I find to be interesting. So here is that. Now I will note I have some opinions about this quote, and I still believe that this quote does not support the idea of a monthly Hecate's Deipnon. So this is from Moralia 709a. Again, this is only in the Loeb Classic Library. Now I suppose the first obligation of one who is invited and himself asks others is to be careful not to ask too many. He must not seek provisions for everyone about him, as though they were an army living off an enemy country, nor like a player seizing squares in a game of petoy. Always be squeezing out his host's men with his own friends or driving them all from the board. This would put the hosts in the position of people setting out suppers for Hekate, and the hostile spirits they never get a taste themselves, and their household has for its share nothing but smoke and tumult. Now, I don't know about you, but to me that quote doesn't read as a support of the Deipnon, but rather a warning or a turn of phrase. To me, since this is a book about morals, these conversations that he had with friends at his dinner table, that this comes from book 7, the table talk. So to me, what I get from this is that if you invite too many people, more than you have provisions for, or if you show up unannounced to a party with more people than the host has provisions for, then you are better off leaving that food for Hekate, because when you leave a meal to the chthonic deities, like I've said before, you're not supposed to eat it. You're supposed to leave it out. To me, that is what that quote is saying, that if you do this thing, you are better off leaving out these suppers for Hekate and the dead. And I was able to find a modern author writing about Hecate's Deipnon. However, she also, this is from Sarah Iles? I'm sorry. Johnston? It's from Johnston, we'll just say. It's from Johnston's Restless Dead. It has sometimes been assumed that these suppers were taken to the crossroads every month, as a prophylaxis against such ever-present and abundant sources of potential danger as the souls of those who had died young. But like the Selenuntine rite for the Tritopatores, it is also possible that the suppers were offered only as the need arose, when some terrible occurrence signaled that the dead were angry. The monthly suppers are not mentioned in any festal calendars, which would tend to support the latter idea, although the omission may also mean only that they were taken to the crossroads by individuals on their own behalf, not by representatives of the state or any other body. In either case, their regular offering does not seem to have been understood as so crucial to the health of the polis as the whole state sanction and control were necessary. Another thing about the Moralia is that the manuscripts we have are from the 10th century. Now, this does not mean that it is invalid. There are many texts that we have from a lot later that we were able to then date back. However, one must account for errors in translation, like the fact that the quote in the Moralia about the Deipnon is not in every translation. That is only in the more recent translation put out by the Loeb Classic Library. And another thing that someone mentioned in one of my discords is that it's important not to project backwards onto something. So Plutarch is from the 1st century, which is the Hellenistic period. So Plutarch's views are 500 years after classical Athens and after that Aristophanes quote. One has to keep that in mind. And perhaps Plutarch is quoting works that we don't have in existence anymore, but we will really never know. So I don't want the takeaway for this video to be that Hecate's Deipnon is a lie. Hecate's Deipnon doesn't exist. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is how we have been interpreting it is it's largely based on a strange collage of not necessarily interconnected thoughts. What we know about the Deipnon is that we don't know anything about the Deipnon. The only thing we know is that sometimes Hekate was given suppers. Everything else is kind of looking backwards or translating certain things in a certain way. Don't take away from this that Hecate's Deipnon is a lie. Take away from this, question everything, and I think this is an evolving conversation. And I'm genuinely considering emailing some local classics professors and seeing what their input is on this, because it's hard for a bunch of people who are not academics to debate academic material without knowing how to properly read it. This is a living conversation. I'll probably do a part 2 about this, but in the meantime, keep questioning everything, and just because something seems well-sourced doesn't mean it is. That's all from me editing Felicity. So let's get back to the video. If anyone has any other sources to counter this, please provide them below. If you find any other like primary sources from the classical period, those are what I'm really looking for. If you send me some other stuff, please send me like direct quotes. As inhaled a tea leaf. Oh, no, that was a fly. Oh, God. Oh, God, I just drank a fly. Is this a sign that someone's mad about what I'm saying? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to live my life. I'm sorry you all had to witness that. Oh, I will never be the same. Oh, fix my hair so I no longer look a wee bit mad. I got tea that is not filled with flies. And I got a little bit of a snack because I was like, I'm losing it. We're not taught and we don't teach within the community how to properly source something. And so what ends up happening with things like the Deipnon and Carnips is that it literally becomes whispered on the alley and it becomes revisionist fill in the blanks. Like I was looking at a prominent Hellenic polytheist website because they talked about the Deipnon and I wanted to know where their sources are. And they usually provide them. However, when I went to look at their sources for the Deipnon, it was that one line from Plutus. And then they also cited some scholarly sources. And I was like, oh, yay. Every single one predated World War II. One of them was from 1937. The other one was from 1908, which was like a rewriting of something from 1890. You know anything about that time period? Yeah, specifically the earlier ones, like the 1890s and 1900s, they were fraught with misinformation. I mean, that's where we get Margaret Murray and the witch cult from. That's where we get Robert Graves and the Maiden Mother Crone. All of these things that have now been disproven, but made their influence in occultism. They all stem from those time periods. Robert Graves is like later, like 19-teens, early 1920s, but by the 1930s, they were still quoting all of these people. It wasn't really until like the 1960s that we started to question those earlier sources. So a lot of sources like that are kind of fraught with problems that a lot of people don't know how to read with a critical eye, because understandably, you're not taught how to read that stuff with a critical eye. I have a whole video planned on the Victorians and the misremembering of history, because boy howdy, there's a lot to unpack here. And apparently more than I thought. So that's why I always try to provide like contemporaneous sources for this channel. I try to be really thorough with my sources, which is why I'm making this video today, to kind of show you what happens, a more extreme example of when I come across things that are maybe not so true. It's kind of, this is what happens when I come across that. It's kind of a nightmare. I have a whole damn video planned, and my options were either make this video or move on, but I was like, I think it's important, especially after talking to some other Hellenic polytheists today who were helping me through this. Thank you so much if you were helping me find sources, translate things, come up with explanations and theories. Thank you so much. So that's why it's important to really check your sources, and that is why I emphasize scholarly stuff. I know it's not always accessible, but when you look at blogs that seem to be well-sourced, even if they seem to be well-sourced, they still perpetuate this. They cite a couple of things or several things, and so you take everything that they say at face value instead of looking critically at everything that they say, because they're not required to back up every single thing that they say on a blog. Obviously, like if I was, I would just be putting like footnotes crazily everywhere. Like I know scholarly stuff can really suck to read, and that's why I'm trying to make some of it more accessible with my YouTube. I'm like trying to be really transparent with what I know and what I don't know and what I think and what I just, I'm not perfect. I'm not a classicist. I'm not a historian. I work in the historical field, but like, I'm not a historian by training. Like I'm not an academic. Always dive deeper. Always ask questions. Question everything. Ask as many questions as you need until you get to the bottom of it. Question me, please. Please question me. Ask me for my sources. I don't even introduce myself. Oh my god. I'm Fel the Blythe. I'm stressed out. I drank a fly. This has been me. Welcome to my channel if you're new here. If you're new here, please check out my Hellenism 101 series. Anyway, I'm very hungry, and I also have to record my podcast very soon, so back to the research game. Thank you for joining me on my rambles. I hope you learned something. I know I did. Just trying to sit down and research this. All right. I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.